morning and welcome to the show Artifact Live, where I talk about the art and science of storytelling. My name is Scott McArthur. Well, thank you very much for tuning in again, everybody. It's been one hell of a week. I've had a few issues this week, so I will probably tell you about them at the end. It's been a laugh, not. But nevertheless, we made it, and I'm delighted to say my guest Bret Freeman is here with us today as well, and I'll introduce Bret shortly. Now, this week, following on from last week's show where we spoke about the link between travel and storytelling, and I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. I thought it was lovely to share some of my travel writing heroes with you, people that you may not have heard of before, and I've had a few emails about that, so it's nice that I introduced you to somebody. I wish I'd never heard of some of these people. I mean, Anthony Bourdain, I wish I'd never heard of him before, because wow, you're on a journey now if you're anything like me with that guy. But I think that we've got over the next few weeks some deeper dives into some of the topics that we've touched on in the past 35 shows. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm interviewing the Scottish author, playwright and filmmaker Ewan Morrison tomorrow at midday for next week's show. So I'm looking forward to that. I've got a few other things in the pipeline that you know, including Nancy Duarte and Bill McFarlane. So we really have, along with Bret today, some really wonderful superstars in this space coming on the show now. I'm feeling I'm actually quite nervous about it, if I'm absolutely honest. I wonder sometimes if I'm going to dry up and forget what the hell I'm talking about. But anyway, hopefully not today. So to today, now this is quite close to my heart. It's the neuroscience of story, and anything that in the scientific domain, you know, gets me going. And I obviously, from my background, I'm very interested in it. And I just want to tell you a quick story before I introduce Bret, because hold on, I've just got a little thing on my screen. There you go, it's gone. I worked, as you know, as a research scientist for a number of years, and my job was mainly, it's a subject called morphology, and that's about measurement. And I spent I've got one here. I spent most of my time, Artifact today. I'm quite proud of this. I've got it framed on my wall. It's something I'm really quite proud of. I used to work a lot with bones. So this is a knee joint. This is the sort of the ball part of a knee joint. And the two different colors are two different stains that we used to use to highlight different types of cell in the knee joint. And you'll see there's a gash in the middle of this. Well, this is because this poor person had rheumatoid arthritis, and we were looking at, you know, what was happening to the knee joint in cases of rheumatoid arthritis. Now, I enjoyed it, and it was quite a technical thing. Although I think it's quite artistic, and it looks quite good mounted like that. It got quite complex, and at one stage I was asked to get involved in a brain project, and it was a human brain project. And I worked on the human brain for about 6 months and did about 50 dissections of whole human brains. And I think this helps put where Bret and I come at this from into some context. Working with the human brain is really, really difficult. It feels a bit like when a human brain is fresh, and I know that sounds slightly ugh, but when it's fresh, it's like a sort of jelly type stuff. It's not. It doesn't fall apart, but it is really, really delicate, and because of that, it's very hard to work with. And invasive techniques like what I did with bone. Now, you might think bone would be difficult to study, and it really, really is. But the brain is, it's really difficult. So we used to do what they called cold sections. And that was where you've got a big device that freezes slices of the brain. You have this beautiful thing called it's a knife called a macrotome. And you would take slices of it, and it would be like a cross section of the brain. Then we'd take little micro slices off of that, freeze them frozen in liquid nitrogen, and then look at them as they are and actually drop dye onto them live. Now, you wouldn't do that with another type of nearly very few other types of tissue. Some cancer tissue you do, but not very many other tissues from the human body. And that's how we studied it. But it dried up really quickly. It changed shape really quickly. It was difficult to preserve. If you did preserve it, it lost its structure. You could therefore not look at it as it was in nature. It was bloody difficult. And then over the last 20 years, they've developed some, you'll have heard of some of the sort of imaging techniques that they've used. And there's an awful lot of bullshit around that, because a lot of scientists producing bullshit around that, where they see an effect in the brain and they say, well, that's what's happening. They don't actually know what's happening. It is so complex. And indeed, the biggest project in the world right now, the biggest project in the world is called the Human Brain Project. And it follows on from the Genome Project, which most of you will have heard of. They're now working on the human brain. And it's a bit like, the way I like to describe it is, and this is just a metaphor I use in my own head most of the time, to try and understand what I know, and I know nothing about it. It's like a city with all the lights switched off, and you've got a torch, and you're locked in a room shining that torch. That's what we know about the human brain. So don't fall for any of the, and I've said it already, the bullshit out there about people that say they know how it works. They don't. Nobody does. Not even the people who are world-class experts on this know about it. You remember my guest a few weeks ago, Ashok, who is an academic working on the human brain, and he said, well, I don't know anything about it. He actually really, really does, but he doesn't. And that's why it's so exciting to have someone like Bret on, who understands all of them I've just said and more, but who shares my passion for it, but also I think my curiosity for it. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Bret on, and I'll just switch your camera on, Bret. There we are. Hello, Bret. How you doing?
Hi, Scott. Good. How are you?
I'm good. I told you I'd do a little bit of an intro.
Excellent. Yeah. Really, really good to be here. I've been looking forward to this. So
yeah, likewise.
It's not often you and I get to sit around and have a chat.
No,
so this is really brilliant.
Not. It's a shame it's not around a table with a beer, mate, is it?
Next time.
Yeah, hopefully. So to give everyone a sort of feel for, I mean, I think Bret's got one of the best CVs I've ever seen, right? This guy, I could literally talk to Bret about his CV all day, but let's let Bret do that. Bret, tell us about your background. How did you get to this point?
Yeah. The path is long and winding, I suppose. Long, strange trip, as they say.
Yes.
So I'm a business psychologist with a specialization in applied neuroscience. So what that means is I look at those research papers. I look at those different those different approaches, those different ideas, those different theories, and try to figure out what is it that makes us behave and act in certain ways. And I do that sort of with a business lens. So what is it that makes executives behave and work in certain ways? What is it that makes salespeople behave and act in certain ways? So I work really closely with an organization called the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is an American organization based in America. And so I work with both they've got a brain-based coaching certification course, which I'm one of the lead trainers on. And then I also work across the corporate sector as well, working in areas of leadership development. So my own company, Life Room, I spend most of my time doing exactly that in leadership development, looking again at how, what are these brain-friendly approaches? Why don't certain things work in a corporate environment? And how can we do it just a little bit better?
Yes.
So that's kind of where I spend my time. I've worked across a number of industries, everything from sort of tech to pharmaceutical to military organizations.
Why is it, do you think, Bret, that, I mean, I might be wrong, correct if I'm wrong, but I certainly seem to have perceived that there's a large development in this area. People are very interested in it, which, we both share a view here. But why is it though that it has gone boom? It's exponential.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of become a sort of a flavor of the month, really, hasn't it? Is all of a sudden everybody's a neuroscientist, and it's quite interesting for those of us who have been working in the field for a number of years, and now people are kind of starting to catch up. But what that does is it also brings with it, I suppose, an element of some quite shallow presentation. right?
Yeah.
And people talking about whatever it was they read in the last sales book or the last the last motivational book that they read, and not necessarily testing those things that they're out there touting or out there working towards. And then we wonder, gosh, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's I mean, it's not new, because if you look at the history of this, I mean, the grandfathers of it all, I guess, were Freud and Jung, neither of whom are now subject of any academic study, neither of whom are, there's not a university in the world, they talk about it in your introduction to psychology. They're the grandfathers, but they were storytellers, which is interesting, actually. And I think Jung in particular was a very good storyteller. But nevertheless, there was nothing scientific about it. They were guessing. But you still get Jungian practices. You get people like Jordan Peterson talking about Jung all the time. And yeah, why is it, do you think, that has hung around?
I think to some degree, and I probably don't mean this to sound how it's going to come out, but to some degree, those Freudian theories, Jungian theories, even Maslow, that they're easy to comprehend.
Yeah.
Right. And because they're easy to comprehend, you can kind of get your head around them without a whole lot of kind of deep dive academic study.
Yes.
And again, excuse me, like anything else, because the sort of the first in is kind of grabs the lion's share, so to speak.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So when you think about Freud, you think about Jung, you think about any of those guys, and even early NLP was all based on lots of Jungian theory, and as things kind of progress, it takes a certain discipline to continue to test and challenge all of those things that you may or may not know, may or may not ascribe to, and people aren't necessarily willing to change a belief that they may have been thinking about for a long time. But sometimes new things come up.
Right, this is going to lead us down a fascinating. I like that. I mean, interesting. Right, this is a piece of trivia that not even all these experts know about. Maslow never drew a triangle. It's not in any of his books, any of his papers. Maslow never drew a triangle, but he's everywhere attributed to triangles. And all you need to do is scratch it. And you can't. It's not there. And. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I quite like Maslow as well as a storyteller. Certainly there is still people studying Maslow. It's still something that people look at, more so than Jung and Freud, but very interesting. So how?
Yeah, well, I think all those things, I think all those things go to, what we like to do. Linking it to storytelling is everything we do. We tell ourselves stories, right? We build pictures in our brains. We tell stories in our brains, and anything I can do to codify anything else is going to be pleasing to me. Our brains like predictability. We hate uncertainty more than anything. Uncertainty, kind of puts us in that sort of threat state. And so if I can use Jung, or I can use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I can use any of those things, Myers-Briggs, any kind of psychometric profiling. If I can put things in boxes, then what I have is certainty around those things I've put in the boxes. But what that does is it puts me in a real fixed mindset when it comes to my thinking and my own growth.
Yes.
So, where do you draw the line, right?
I can see behind you.
The lines.
I can see behind you, you've got a phrenology head there behind you as well. So it's been around for so long that I guess it's in the public psyche. But so how does somebody then who, I've said to you before, I used to get quite cross about it, when the sort of the more cultish NLPers and Scientologists and, others in that, quasi-scientific methodologies start telling me how good they are at, using disc to tell me what color donkey I like or whatever. And I get really, I used to get quite angry about it, if I'm honest. I guess now I'm maybe slightly, I just couldn't, it doesn't bother me as much, but I do worry about the impact over years of this bullshit being peddled on organizations, because, and this is where my question really is, I mean, how does somebody who gets all of that then get into an organization? Because I asked the question of a neuropathologist, and I asked him the question is, where are all the academics in business talking about the brain? There aren't any, and well, there are a few, but the reason is it's so bloody complex that they don't have the nerve to say, I know how it works. You know, they go, oh, well, it's a bit complicated, this. It might work today, but it might not work tomorrow. You know, all that sort of, how do we help people, or how do you rather help people to get value out of this? How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think like with any science, I think what we're doing is we are following the research, we're following the science, right?
Yeah.
And the science may change from day to day, and that's okay, because the more we investigate something, the more we're going to find out about it. And the more we find out about it, the more things might change. And so, you know, when you're looking at people who are, you know, really kind of trying to make science relevant across a business environment, right? You know, you look at guys like Matt Lieberman or you know, Daniel Pink or you know, David Rock, you know, Heidi Halverson, those kind of things. We see that there are some that are really working towards you know, kind of bringing the science to light. You know, look at Amy Cuddy and look at Presence, right? So Presence was a huge book based on some science that she did, and like all good scientists, so she puts this book out, she does this TED Talk, and you know, it gets lots and lots of attention. A bunch of scientists got together and they tried to replicate the experiments. They didn't quite replicate them the same way that she did, so they got different results, so they put it out. So then her and her team went back to the drawing board, and they said, no, hang on a second, we've done it again, and here it is. And so it goes back and forth. And so how does it evolve? How does it change? And the thing is, what do we do to embrace those changes? And that's what's important, right?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. And the Cuddy story is a good example, because I think when she said in an interview I saw recently that, you know, the TED Talk, which was one of the most successful ever TED Talks, isn't really valid anymore. But a lot of people still think, and I'm not having a go at people, incidentally, Bret, because how do they know? As you say, there's this ongoing process, and she was being authentic when she did what she did. I mean, she wasn't telling lies. I mean, she was reporting on her, I think, somewhat limited and poorly designed piece of research, but nevertheless, she was being authentic. But how do we educate, or have you any perspective on it? How do we educate the public? Because it's a bit like, you know, if a politician makes a U-turn, she is lambasted. If a scientist makes a U-turn, she wins a Nobel Prize. You know, it really is. You know, it's
well, this is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so what we tend to do when we kind of embed these ideas, you know, and we start to move in a direction, then, particularly if we're vocal about it, then what happens is we create a you know, what's called a cognitive dissonance within ourselves. Gosh, if I move in another direction, I have to disagree with myself, and disagreeing with myself is really hard. Because, you know, I've got lots of unconscious biases that, you know, I've got you know, confirmation bias and those kind of things that are trying to keep me on track. But what happens is when all of a sudden I realize, oh, hang on a second, you know, as we were talking about before, you know, people still talking about right brain and left brain, people still talking about, you know, the lizard brain and the triune brain, and all of that stuff is so outdated, and you know, there's whole sales organizations that are built around that. Gosh, we need, you know, creative people and you know, analytical people. So that means we got to test for right brain and left brain, and you know, the way to get a sale is to really appeal to that lizard brain. But hang on a second, we've never had a lizard brain, right? and right brain, left brain stuff is even more outdated. And so, you know, when we think about those kind of things, in order to you know, to disagree with any of those things that we may have been taught, then we have to disagree with ourselves, and that's what's difficult.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that is difficult. And I guess if you're not working on something all the time and close to the literature, it's really difficult to get close to the literature now because there's so much of it.
Yeah. Well, and we tend to, we tend to, if you're interested in a thing and you get a body of knowledge in a thing, and then you stop pursuing knowledge in that thing because you are satisfied where you're at. When the knowledge moves on, guess what? You're still kind of back here with whatever that knowledge that you used to have.
Yes.
And as things move on, we kind of get left behind.
I mean, it's even, I'm going to use a word that I don't even know if I like, but the sort of mindset, the scientific mind. I mean, I remember I had the great pleasure of spending some time with a chap called Professor Hall, who was the fella who demonstrated that the Turin shroud was a fake. That was his. He's famous for that, and he won a Pulitzer Prize, in fact, for it. And but he, near the end of his career, he was believe it or not, he was a color expert. And what he used to do, he was an unusual character because he was a scientist, but he was also a historian. And he would look at the history of color, believe it or not. So he would say, this is when certain colors were invented, and when, he had them all plotted, and he's written books about it. But towards the end of his career, I was at a seminar, and it was a proper seminar. It was there was maybe 100 of us in the room, and he was walking around the tables talking to everybody. And one of the other professors in the room, a younger professor, stood up and said, it's a pleasure having you here, sir. And that usual, academic referential behavior. But then he said, how did you feel when, and I can't remember for the life of me, I think it was a Florentine university, had actually fundamentally demonstrated that one of his key ideas had been wrong. And I kid you not, Bret, he said, without even thinking about it, he said it was one of the best days of my life. So he'd spent 30 years working on a particular idea, and then somebody had, not unequivocally, but fairly fundamentally, because there's no such thing as facts in science either, another misconception, but he had been shown to be likely to be very wrong, and he was delighted about it. Can you imagine that in the boardroom?
Well, that's the thing. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and Simon Sinek was on it.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things, I think Simon has a really great way to look at things utterly and totally simplistically and make things relatable. And so I think he really adds a lot of value there. And he was talking about kind of this exact thing. He was talking about how he was working with an organization, and the title of this particular podcast was "Don't Be Afraid to Be the Idiot." And he said, look, I was sitting around this boardroom with all of these C-levels. So it was me in the C-suite in this organization. They had brought in this consultant. The consultant was, whiteboarding and drawing boxes and drawing relationships and doing all this stuff and saying, this is how we need to do. And everybody was kind of nodding. And Sinek says, and the thing is as I was looking, I wasn't quite following what he was saying. So I kind of raised my hand and I said, I don't get it. Can you explain that a little bit more? And so the consultant kind of went in and started to explain a little bit more. And Simon stood and he looked there and he says, I still don't get it. How about you guys? And what happened was, in the course of 20 minutes, the entire C-suite went from nodding in agreement to saying, yeah, actually, we don't get it either. We were just embarrassed to speak up and say we don't get it. And Senek's whole point was, don't be afraid to be an idiot. If you don't get it, say I don't get it. Right? Yeah. If somebody can give you an alternate idea that makes sense, say, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Rather than being, sometimes we're just so stubborn. And again, it comes back to our kind of innate nature. It comes back to our desire to always be proving ourselves rather than be improving ourselves. If I can use mindset terminology, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting story, because on a number of fronts, because I think I have certainly been guilty of not understanding that if there's agency in something for some people, then there's value in that something. And I think I think it's my training. I think because I was trained as a scientist, I've got that very well. You need to, I'm interested, but I need to understand it as well. And I think I haven't always appreciated that, people love music. You can't really measure that. It's just there. It's beautiful. It has agency. But can I take you into the agency part of it then, the getting something from your work specifically? If you want to go general, that's fine. But if I'm a chief executive and I, pop onto your website, what is it that you would do for them? What could you do for them? What do you offer to help in terms of, moving them in the right direction?
Yeah. So as I work with organizations, again, I really work towards what I call a brain-friendly model. So for instance, if I'm working with a C-suite around performance, right? And so what is it that makes people what is it that improves performance, right? And so oftentimes we move in the wrong directions, because we think about things like the lizard brain, or we think about we've all read all of those sales books that came out in the 90s, and what happens is they just as we start to apply the principles of very basic neuroscience to these things, they don't kind of hold up. And so I'll give you a practical example. So lots of organizations will think about how they motivate their salespeople, right? And so they'll motivate their salespeople, and they do two things. They either reward them with money, right? They put a carrot in front of them, or they hit them with a stick, right? And depending on which organization you're working in, it's usually the stick that people are using to motivate. Yes. But the other thing is, when they start to try to motivate their staff with money, with monetary, with compensation, what they're not recognizing is that there's a huge difference between how people are motivated internally. Are we motivated intrinsically, by meaning something that we are chasing after because it's got some internal value, or are we motivated extrinsically because somebody's put a goal in front of us? And typically money fits in that extrinsic thing. So there's a great piece of research done by a guy at Harvard Business School called Ian Larkin. Right. And basically, the long and the short of it is so he did some research with a large software firm in the US. And this software firm operated a president's club, like a lot of organizations do. And the way that this particular sales organization was structured is that there was compensation for the more deals that you were able to close in a single quarter. Right. President's Club, however, they looked at your overall annual sales. And so basically, when it came sort of to near the end of the year, the salespeople that were kind of on borderline of making President's Club or not had a decision make. Do I close my sales now in this quarter, get the accelerators and make a lot more money? Or do I spread them out and delay those sales until next quarter, not make as much on the commission because my accelerators aren't in play, but make President's Club? Right. Okay. And so what they found was that on average, salespeople were willing to forego as much as $30,000 in lost commission in order to make President's Club, because President's Club appealed to that social need for status. Right. And so when we try to motivate people with money, and as they extrapolated, and I won't go into all the research, but as they kind of dug deeper and deeper into this research, it's those social motivators that are the things that move people forward. So social motivators that help us to perform the best that we can, not necessarily the bonus. I mean, we all like to say, oh yeah, I want the bonus, but it's more that the recognition that's an important bit. Right?
Do you think that's I hadn't heard of Larkin's work? I'll have a look.
Really good, that one.
Yeah. Do you think that the sort of post-pandemic time, where, I mean, again, there's a lot of nonsense being talked about it, but there is, without a doubt, I think there is an opportunity here, if nothing else, for organizations and indeed consultancies and people like you and I who help companies to change their model, I think. Is there anything in that area that you would think, because what you've just said, I used to work in the Big Four and the Big Four consulting companies, and it's all about money, it's all about bonuses, and it's every career ends in failure, because you make your target one year, they put it up the next year, so you can't make it. So then you just go and move to the next company. So they're all prostitutes. They just keep moving around the companies.
Exactly.
They don't get taught until they get until they retire. I mean, that is literally what a consultant's life is like. You know, proper to big end consulting. That is what it's like. But do you think there is well, I think that obviously there is an opportunity, but what do you think the opportunity could be? What consequences do you think could come in this sort of area in your domain post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's tons of opportunity, because what we have found through COVID, if nothing else, is where people's kind of social compass lies. And what I mean by that is, you know, how are we about working at home? How are we about, you know, missing our colleagues at work? How are we about wanting that human connection? How are we about wanting to just feel like we're part of a group?
Yeah.
How are we when it comes to, you know, our own autonomy, right? Daniel Pink's done a lot of work in this area, thinking about autonomy, what autonomy does for people, how autonomy is a motivator. You know, and we've got, certainly for those that work from home, have a super high level of autonomy, absolutely. But are we potentially missing some relatedness that we could also benefit from? Because, you know, I mean, I've since lockdown, I mean, I'm fortunate to have a dedicated workspace, but I spend all day, every day by myself in this room, talking to people on my screen.
Yes.
And, you know, sometimes I just want to, as you said, I want to sit down and have a beer. I want to give somebody a hug. You know, I want to look into somebody's eyes, that, you know. So I think there's lots of room there to talk about it. And of course, the next learning curve we're going to have is as things start to loosen up, what does a hybrid work model look like? Because we've got some people working from home, some people working from the office, and how do those meetings work, right? How do those interactions work? And how do we make sure that everybody, again, is included in the things that we're doing, and people aren't feeling like they're, you know, left out in the cold, or we're responding to those social needs. I think really important.
One thing that might make you laugh. I was at home in Scotland last week, and I was talking to my mum and dad about all this stuff, and they're of another era. And but my dad said something like, he said, "Well, I think what we've learned is that most people are just lazy bastards, and most of them don't want to go back to work." Now, do you know, I actually looked into that. And there is actually some truth in that, that I think a lot of people, certainly at the level that you and I work at, we're all full of highfalutin ideas and about how people care about their work and derive meaning and all the rest of it. But I think there's a lot of other people who work's just work. And I often think they get ignored from a lot of the leadership models, because they couldn't give a monkeys if they're picking fruit or, you know, cleaning floors. They just want a job that pays money so they can have a life with their family. And I mean, that's a noble pursuit. I have no issue with that. But I think it has shown, and I think there is some, I know there is at least one academic working on this, that a lot of people really don't like work, really don't like it, and have thrived during lockdown. They've not become traumatized. They've not become, you know, disconnected. They don't like work, so they've had a ball. They're getting 80% of their wages. They've had a ball for a year, you know. But you never hear that in the media, do you? Because that's not trendy. That's not you know, it's not creating another excuse for people to have trauma. Sorry, I'm going off to another one of my.
But what's what's driving that behavior behind the scenes, right? Is it that you know, that they're meeting social needs other ways? They're meeting social needs with their family. They're meeting, or, you know, they just haven't found the thing that really lights them up yet, right? Because I spent a lot of time in jobs that I really didn't like. Until I finally got to something that I just, you know, can't get enough of, right? I you know, hazard to say, I almost dislike weekends, because that means I'm unplugged, and you know, that means that I'm not in front of my research, and that's what I like to do. So do you know what I mean? So you know, what is it that drives those kind of things? But then I think also the key there is the autonomy that it gives people to work or not, because they can decide, gosh, I want to do this, or gosh, I don't want to do this. And, you know, some, you know, especially early on, a lot of the organization I work with, you know, they would say, oh, well, you know, the thing is that whenever we have a call, whenever we have a Zoom call, which is, you know, most of the day, I make sure that everybody has to be on camera. And I always ask, you know, is that the most beneficial way to run a meeting?
Yes.
Because,
Yeah.
for somebody who's on camera all day, that's not used to being on camera, that's got that little picture of themselves in the bottom corner
Yeah.
that occupies a large part of your brain while you're trying to think about other things.
Yes.
Sometimes people just need a break. And if you
Yeah.
give them a little bit of autonomy, say, look, I'd like for you to be on camera when you're speaking, and otherwise I get it. You need a break. Fine. Turn your cameras off. Doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
does it impact really? Right?
That's, I mean, it's such an obvious way of dealing with it, but companies don't do the obvious thing, do they? Oftentimes they
Well,
are led down
yeah.
these often metric led things that I think don't always help people. So let's just press pause for a couple of minutes, Bret.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll come back to you. And there's one thing in particular I want to ask you about, but I'll come back to you in a minute. I hope you've enjoyed that so far. And I always find speaking to Bret, really, it's almost grounding for me. He's got such a good way of bringing things back to reality and practicalities, and he pulls me back quite often, and I like that a lot. So just to remind you, you're watching Artifact Live, which is about the art and science of storytelling, and my name is Scott McArthur. A couple of things I just wanted to remind you about that are happening, one indeed this week. On Thursday evening, I've got a little caption here. On Thursday evening, I've got a show that I'm doing under the auspices of the Funzing platform. Now, I thought Funzing had gone bust, but they haven't. There's a platform. The Funzing is an organisation that facilitates people doing talks online or live. And in 2019, I did a 30-day UK tour with Funzing all over the UK in pubs and clubs, just practicing my storytelling and the back. So on Thursday night, if you'd like to join me, I'm doing an hour and a half. It's mainly going to be me talking, and then maybe I hope half an hour at the end where we can have a discussion about storytelling. And it's a lot more formal than this. I'll give, obviously I will tell some stories, but it's a bit more formal than this. And it's only 12 quid, guys. So if you would like to support me, if nothing else, please join me on Thursday evening. Now, the good news is it's going to be every final Thursday of every month from now on. I'm going to be doing these events. This one in particular is about storytelling at work, because I've had a lot of feedback from people saying, everybody's qualified now. How do I stand out? Well, one of the ways I believe that you can stand out is by using your own stories. So come along if you're stuck under that glass ceiling, or you're looking to get that promotion or to get into a new area where you've never worked before. Come along on Thursday night, and I'll give you some tips and ideas on how to do that. The second thing I would just wanted to mention before we go back to Bret is that I have decided, and I've had some abuse about this, as in, why didn't you do this before? I've decided I'm going to repurpose my live show as a podcast. So obvious that I've not done it. I've just not done it. So I've already registered it. It's going to be called Artifact Live, the art and science of storytelling. And I was hoping to launch it this week, but I can't because I've had other things which I'll tell you about after we finish having this chat with Bret. But it will be going out probably live, starting to download the episodes, starting, I think, tomorrow. So bear with me. I'll explain after we've said goodbye to Bret. But let's get Bret back on. Hello, Bret.
Hello.
That's my little interval that I do, my little advertisements. Let's go back again then to the agency of all of this, and ask you, this is an unfair, but where do you think this is going to go? Where is this going to go, mate? Because it's a huge area, complex. There's a lot of sharks out there. You've mentioned some interesting people, but they're all journalists. Simon Sinek, Dan Pink, they're either marketeers or journalists. They're not scientists. There's Adam Grant as well doing good work in this space. There's others that are trying, and I guess he's an academic, but he's not a scientist. So where do you think this is going to go? And is there anything over the horizon that you're excited about in this field?
I'm excited about everything. Are you kidding? I think more than anything, I am really happy to see that neuroscience now features in leadership, because it hasn't for a really long time.
Okay.
And there's wheat and chaff out there, and I get all that, and so we try to do the best we can to fight the good fight and all that kind of stuff. But at least there's an awareness.
Yes.
right? And at least, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if I would have walked into a company and say, well, you know what I want to do is I want to, apply research in the area of neuroscience to your business practice. People would say, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Are you kidding? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
At least now, we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
Look, have you thought about these things? Have you thought about, what this potentially can bring to your organization? And we can start having different kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the people that are prominent, that in the business world, again, you can kind of draw, examples from, right? You can draw examples from Seneca and say, oh yeah, well, the reason why this works is because, actually the neuroscience behind it is this and that, or any of those kind of, Daniel Pink or any of those kind of guys. But there's guys out there like Kahneman as well, right? That are kind of making things a bit more mainstream. And and talking, and so, like I said, I think that the thing that I'm most excited about is the fact that we can have the conversation, right?
Yes.
And that's where it really comes down to.
Yeah. And if there was an example that you, maybe from your own work, I mean, I'm trying to get a story here, I guess, but where you have applied this, and I'm not interested in KPIs. I'm interested in the human side of it. I mean,
yes.
What have you seen, when this lands for your clients, what you're trying to do with them? Because I respect very much what you're trying to do here, and what's been an example of you walking in, doing some work and walking out thinking, yeah, that landed.
Yeah. So particularly organizations that I work with on an ongoing basis, because obviously if I go in and I deliver something and then I leave and I don't necessarily see the results of that.
Yeah.
Working with an organization at the moment, and I've just wrapped up the first of a month-long program. We've got 2 other programs to build on top of that. But what I've seen is their language is changing. What I've seen is that their attitudes are changing. You mentioned KPIs. We talk an awful lot about KPIs and where do they come from and what's the motivation for KPIs. And now I'm starting to see that organizations saying, hang on a second, maybe measuring against KPIs doesn't get the best out of our people. But what it does is it puts them in that perpetual threatened state. And when we're in that perpetual threat state, what happens is the part of our brain that does our logical thinking, our prefrontal cortex, shuts off.
Yeah.
Because we're threatened, because our brains are flooded with cortisol, because the emotional part of our brain takes the energy away, and now all of a sudden we expect our people to do the best, right? It doesn't work, right? So I suppose that's just off the top of my head, coming to an organization that was very heavily measured about everything, very heavily KPI oriented, very heavily strict and stringent on everything that their employees did.
Yes.
As they start to loosen that up a bit, they start to consider, the value of co-creation of goals, co-creation of conversations, co-creation of direction. Then what they're seeing is they're seeing performance of their team members start to go through the roof. Again, language changing.
Yes.
Right? People starting to consider, gosh, the one thing that most of us never consider is how does my communication, when it leaves my mouth, how does it enter somebody else's ears? Because whatever my thoughts are, I'm creating these thoughts in my head, and I'm telling myself a story.
Yes.
Based on my filters, based on my biases, based on my experiences, based on any number of things. I tell myself a story, and then it comes out of my mouth. And as it goes into your ears, you take that in and you create a story out of those bits.
Yes.
Ignoring the parts that aren't important to you because they don't fit your agenda. Yes. Maybe filling in them. I mean, our brains like predictability. And so what our brains like to do is we like to fill in blanks, whether there's an intentional blank or whether we've created the blank because the thing that you just said isn't important.
Yes.
And so bringing that understanding into an organization is revolutionary, both internally and externally.
Yes. So that's really interesting. I share your perspective, probably don't frame it as well as you did, on KPIs, key performance indicators, and how they can be terribly restrictive and damaging in a company. And In fact, I ran an experiment when I used to work with PwC where I got them to do an experiment, which is something that companies are really averse to. They don't understand that it's the best way to find out what works is to experiment. I mean, they'll do a pilot scheme, but they don't really mean a pilot scheme. They mean they're trying it out to see if it works, and then they're going to embed it anyway, whether it works or not. But I did a piece where I said to PwC, I'll make you a bet. I said, if we stop performance management, I bet your performance improves. And it did. 6.6%. Yes. It improved.
Absolutely.
You know? So, and I mean, I don't believe that that's the answer. I don't believe that we need to stop it. But I think the way you crafted that answer to that question is really important. And I personally believe that if we do want to get some, and I don't believe everybody wants to get something out of this, but I think if we do want to create an opportunity for change, it's not transformation, I don't think. It's certainly not metamorphic, but I think that sort of thing, companies have been waiting for it for years, you know, that we need to relax a little bit and give people space. And you ain't going to do that if you say, and I'm going to measure everything you do.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because what behaviors are you driving with measurement, right? And you know, when we you know, there's kind of a famous quote, and I use this a lot. Is when the measure becomes the target, it no longer is an effective measure. So, for instance, if I'm working with a salesperson, and I've got a sales team, and what I'm doing in the sales team is I'm measuring how many calls they make a day. Right. Then the target is to make the call, not to make the sale. And so all of a sudden the measure becomes a target. And now it's no longer an effective measure because people are just, I'm going to call you because you're my friend. And hey, Scott, how's it going? I just want to have a little chat here. And that's one call. Let's see who else can I call. I'm going to call my other friend. There's two calls, right? And so what behavior are we driving? And again, that's the thing that I'm always asking when we're talking about performance measures, when we're talking about, you know, what's the behavior we're driving? And as you work with leadership, you know, the number of times I've heard leaders say, well, you know, what I want is I want all my people to, you know, really play to their strengths. And what they actually mean is, you know, I want all of my people to really play to my strengths. And the motivation's wrong, right? The motivation's wrong. I want you to do this because I want this done, not because you've got an intrinsic desire to do this thing, to be you know, excellent at whatever it is that you do.
Wow.
And so we get it upside down.
Yes,
entirely.
Absolutely. Wow. That's a lovely, I mean, we're over time already, Brett. I'm sorry. We're over 45 minutes.
We're always over time.
I need to ask you about, I've got to ask you one more thing. Forgive me if I'm going to tend to some more of your time, but the final thing, the way we met is actually in many ways a microcosm of some of the things that have been happening in society over the last 15 years. And we met on the Red Dot, didn't we? We did a TEDx talk at Telford at the same time. And the TED movement, what do you think of the TED movement now? I mean, now we're 10 years down the line. If not, I think it's 10 years. What do you feel about the TED movement now?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that because you know you watch the sort of the early TED Talks, and they were, you know, kind of trying to bring this back to our storytelling, right? They were about that, right? They were about an experience that somebody had or is having and is sharing that, right? I mean, they started TED Talks on the West Coast of America, being technical sharing of ideas, right? And what they've kind of, in my opinion, I think that TED has either is dangerously close or has kind of already kind of tipped over into being a real vanity industry, right? What I want to do is I want to stand on the Red Dot because I've got something to say, and I want to make sure that I'm able to say it, not I've got an idea I'd like to share with you and see if it's got an impact.
Yes.
And that's, you know, again, we go wrong in so many areas in corporate life, and it kind of all comes back to the same. You know, what is it that, you know, TED is all about? Ideas worth spreading. right?
Yeah.
So is whatever that talk you're watching, is whatever that talk that you're delivering, is whatever that talk you're listening to, is that an idea that's gonna stir something?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Not forget that I've got something to say and I want you to hear it.
Yeah.
But gosh, I've got this thought that's kind of had an impact on me, and I wonder if it might have an impact on you too. Have you thought about
Yeah.
this? Just kind of curious. And
I,
those are the things, those are the ones that are amazing.
yes, I share that. I mean, I worry that a lot of mainly on the TEDx side of it, the more the second level, if you like, that a lot of people selling books. It's almost become a marketing opportunity. And I mean, you and I have both done a couple, haven't we? And I wasn't selling anything in either of them. I was trying to share an idea, but yeah, it's interesting. I wonder where it'll go.
I think yeah, I mean, my favorite TED Talk of all time, and I'll just give a plug here because I think she's brilliant, is Amanda Palmer from the Dresden Dolls. Do you know the Dresden Dolls?
Yeah, I do. She's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Her TED Talk, it'll make you fall in love. Her TED Talk is just amazing. Yeah. And it's exactly that. Here's a thing that I've experienced, and I just wonder if it might touch you too. And it's one of the best examples of a TED Talk I've ever seen.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what it should be.
Yeah, she is a genius, isn't she? I mean, and she's also married to Neil Gaiman, isn't she? So it's quite a she is quite a character. And I'm a big fan of her as well. Actually, I like her poetry. I like her music.
There it is. Yeah,
she is. And I like the fact that she doesn't seem to worry about anything. She'll say what she thinks.
Yeah.
She'll swear. She'll do anything just to be authentic. So yeah, that's a nice one.
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's just authentic, right? And in everything we do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Bret, that's been a terrific conversation. Carol, I mean, how long is that? That's nearly an hour. We're 7 minutes short of the hour. I haven't even touched on it. Is there any? Thank you. Is there anywhere that you can point people to that you'd like, if they wanted to get in touch with you or ask you any questions? Or
I'm really easy to find. Yeah, I mean, you can just Google me and you'll find me. I'm really easy to find. Send me an email. It's Bret, BRET at Liferoom, LIFEVROOM.com. And I'm always happy to have a chat. I'm always happy to share ideas, share thoughts, and be challenged too. And again, I think that's the key is. So many of us are afraid to be challenged, but bring it on and let's have a conversation.
Android Muir over on Twitch is asking us which pub will you meet in. I think at the moment it's anyone, Andy. Anyone.
That's
at
right.
all.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Bret, thank you very much, and I do hope that in the nearest future we do get to meet in a pub and have a chat, and I'd love to welcome you back on the show sometime in the future as well. But thank you for a fascinating 45 minutes. I've really enjoyed that, mate. Thank you very much for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Thank you. Well, as I promised, I knew Bret wouldn't let me down. Absolutely fantastic. And a guy who I think is incredibly humble, but incredibly wise at the same time. So I hope you found it interesting, everybody. And you go out there and start to think about things like Bret said, let's make sure that we're doing the right thing. And I love that. This is this is probably in my own confirmation bias area, but I totally agree with him about what he said about measurement and maybe over measuring things, because I think it's really important. I think it's one of the things that have got humanity in a straitjacket right now. I really do believe that. Now, we reflected very briefly on our shared experience on the red dot. And yeah, I agree with what Bret said. And I think TED has almost become a little bit tired and somewhat of a vanity. I'm still very proud of doing it, and I will do another one if I get asked to do it. I'm not completely against it, but just recommend something to you that there's a couple of other places that I think are still providing the space for stories that are, I think, more authentic, believe it or not, than TED. Now, one of them is called The Moth. And the Moth is an international group of people who it's real stories. I mean, they don't have the sort of the big author on there, but they do sometimes, but it's mainly people that are from the street, people who, you know, have an ordinary job. There could be a bartender, there could be a scientist, a writer, a playwright, whatever it is. And they just come on and they tell very, very short stories. And actually, I'm hoping to do a moth talk quite soon in the next few weeks. I'll keep you posted on that. But the moth is great. There's another one called the Story Collider. The Story Collider, and that's one that's about scientific stories. And again, I think it's got that edge on TED now that the stories are more authentic. And again, please don't misunderstand me. I still think TED is great, but I think these other places that are popping up now are perhaps places where you can find the fresher stories. Now, I said at the beginning, I'd tell you what's been going on. I've had a difficult week. Basically, one of my very, very good friends called me on Monday saying he's in a hospice and he's about to pass. But there was an important thing there, and I'm going to do a whole video on this. So I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but there was something that came up during that really reminded me, and I'm feeling slightly emotional, that reminded me about storytelling. And it was about, you know how every week, if you're a regular, you know, I always say this at the end. I say, go out and look for stories, because those stories can change the world. Well, this friend of mine, Tom, has no family, nobody. He has nobody to pass on his stories to. So it is quite unusual. I think most people have somebody they can hand on stories to, but Tom has nobody. And I was talking to Tom about this, and you might notice behind me, there's a violin. Now, that violin was made by his grandfather, who was a very famous violin and fiddle maker in Scotland in the 40s and the 50s. He ran a joiner's shop called Mr. Wood's, and nobody knows that story except me, because he told me the story. So I'm going to take that story and I'm going to tell that story. And I'll tell you what, Ted, come and ask me to tell the story, because it's a beautiful story. But that, I think, is one of the key things I want everybody to take away from this show, in that, you know, being an archaeologist of your own life, as I often say, is something that I think we should all endeavor to do. But sometimes you've got to help other people, and sometimes you've got to take those stories on board. So I promise I'll come back and tell the story about the violin maker from my hometown, because I think it's a beautiful story and a very important story. And I'm so sad that it almost died, and it was purely by coincidence that we got onto the conversation. So I'm quite chuffed that we had that conversation. I will tell you more about it later. So that's it for this week. I hope you find it interesting. I think Bret was wonderful, and I hope he does come in some other time. So thank you very much for tuning in to Artifact Live, the art and science of storytelling. My name is Scott McArthur, and I'll see you next week when we're going to have Ewan Morrison talking about life as a jobbing writer and film producer. Thanks very much for tuning in.